The snow falls silent across the northern plains. No engine hums, no furnace roars. Only the wind, carrying secrets older than steel, older than glass, older than the word survival itself. Out here, in the white cathedral of winter, your ancestors did not merely endure the cold. They read it, spoke with it, moved through it like smoke through lodge poles. They knew what you have forgotten. Are you ready to remember what the snow has been hiding? Come closer now. Feel the bite of January air against your face, that particular sting that makes your eyes water and your lungs tighten. Imagine standing at the edge of a spruce forest in what we now call Montana 1,500 winters ago, watching your breath turn to crystal in the failing light. No phone to check, no weather app to consult. Only your knowledge, passed down through generations like a sacred flame, standing between your family and the unforgiving geometry of winter night. This is where we begin. Not in theory, but in the body's memory. In the wisdom that kept whole civilizations alive when the temperature dropped so low that spit froze before it hit the ground. The indigenous peoples of North America survived and thrived through Ice Age conditions, through winters that would kill modern humans in hours. They did this without Gore-Tex, without propane, without the entire industrial supply chain we now take for granted. The Lakota, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Inuit, the Dene, dozens of nations across the frozen north, each developed technologies so elegant, so precisely adapted to their environments, that many remain unsurpassed even by our contemporary gear. These were not primitive people making do with less. These were sophisticated engineers of survival, PhD-level experts in thermodynamics and hydrology and material science. Though they would never have used those words, they understood that winter is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It is a conversation. And if you learn its language, if you listen to what the ice and the wind and the bare branches are telling you, the cold becomes something else entirely. Not comfort, perhaps, but partnership. What follows are 10 techniques, 10 pieces of ancient technology that have been tested across thousands of winters, across millions of frozen nights. Some have been nearly lost. Others survive in remote communities, still practiced by elders who learn from elders, who learn from elders. All of them work. All of them can save your life. And all of them ask you to see winter not as an obstacle to overcome, but as a world to understand. This is not nostalgia. This is not romanticism. This is practical knowledge forged in the coldest classroom on earth, the birch bark fire starter. A single piece of paper white bark, curled like ancient parchment, lies in your palm. The paper birch, Betula papyrifera, grows across the boreal forests of North America, from Alaska to Labrador, its white bark catching the low winter light like a beacon. The Ojibwe called it wigwas, and they understood something about this tree that modern science took centuries to confirm. Its bark contains betulin, a natural oil so flammable, so resistant to moisture, that it will catch fire even when soaking wet, even when pulled from beneath 2 feet of snow, even when your fingers are so numb you can barely feel the match between them. Walk with me to the tree. Notice how the bark peels naturally in horizontal sheets, layer upon layer, like pages of a book written in cellulose. The knowledge keepers would harvest only what they needed, only from dead or dying trees when possible, speaking to the birch as they worked, thanking it for its gift. This was not superstition. This was relationship, the understanding that you do not take without acknowledging what is given. To use this ancient fire starter, you need only to shred the bark into thin strips, creating a bird's nest of papery kindling. The oils in the bark are so volatile that a single spark will catch it, even in wind that would snuff out newspaper, even in cold that makes standard kindling sullen and resistant. The flame burns hot and long, hot enough to ignite damp twigs, long enough to build a proper fire before your hands lose all function. Picture this. You are 2 days from the nearest camp, and the temperature is dropping toward 20 below zero. Your matches are dwindling. Everything in the forest is covered in frost. But there, ghostly pale against the dark spruce, stands the birch. Its bark is a promise. Its oils are a contract signed in fire. You peel one thin sheet, thumb thick, roll it tight, and tuck it inside your coat where your body heat will keep it dry. And now you are no longer afraid because you carry summer in your pocket, compressed and waiting. This is not magic. This is chemistry that predates laboratories. This is knowledge carried in the hands. Snow goggles carved from bone. 2 narrow slits carved into a piece of caribou bone, tied with sinew across the bridge of your nose. The sun on fresh snow can blind you. Not metaphorically, literally. Snow blindness, photokeratitis, the burning of your corneas by ultraviolet light reflected off billions of ice crystals, each one a tiny mirror, turning the whole world into a furnace of light. The Inuit knew this danger intimately. They lived in a landscape where, for months at a time, everything, ground, sky, horizon, merged into one searing white vastness. To travel without protection was to court agony, the feeling of sand beneath your eyelids, the inability to see anything but shadows, sometimes permanent damage. So they carved goggles, not from glass, which they did not have, but from driftwood, from bone, from ivory. The design was brilliant in its simplicity, a curved piece that fit the contours of the face with 2 thin horizontal slits no wider than a pencil line. These slits allowed just enough vision to navigate while blocking more than 90% of the reflected glare. Some versions had even narrower slits, reducing the aperture to almost nothing, creating the same effect as squinting, but without the muscle fatigue. Hold a pair in your hands if you are fortunate enough to see authentic ones in a museum, and feel the weight of them. Notice how the bone is worn smooth where it pressed against the wearer's cheeks. Decade after decade. Notice the careful scoring of the inner surface to prevent light from reflecting back into the eyes. This is technology developed through painful trial, through winters of damaged vision, through the collective intelligence of a people who had to solve the problem of too much light in a land where darkness lasted for months. Modern mountaineers still use the same principle. Glacier glasses with side shields, reducing peripheral glare. But the Inuit version required no manufacturing, no supply chain, no replacement parts. Just knowledge, just a knife, just the willingness to trust that your ancestors had already solved the problem you were facing, and that the solution could be carved in an hour from whatever the land provided. Imagine walking across sea ice in April, when the sun finally returns with all its accumulated hunger. The glare is so intense you can feel it like heat against your closed eyelids. But you have your goggles, tied with a leather thong, pressing gently against your face. Through the twin slits, the world becomes manageable again. You can see the seal's breathing hole a quarter mile ahead. You can see the pressure ridge where the ice buckles and reforms. You can navigate home, and your eyes, precious beyond measure in a landscape where blindness means death, remain clear. The debris hut, building warmth from nothing. A pile of dead leaves and branches, head high, covers you like a second skin. Winter shelter is not about walls, it is about trapped air. The Algonquian peoples understood this so deeply that they could construct emergency survival shelters in under 2 hours, using nothing but what the forest floor provided. No tent, no tarp. Just the fundamental physics of insulation. Dead air space held in place by organic matter. The debris hut begins with a ridgepole, a long straight branch propped between 2 trees or between a tree and the ground, creating an A-frame skeleton. Along this ridgepole, you lay shorter branches, creating ribs. And then, this is the crucial part, you pile on debris. Leaves, pine needles, moss, bark, dry grass. Layer after layer after layer until the heap is 3 feet thick on all sides. The debris does not keep you warm. The debris traps pockets of air, and the air, heated by your body, keeps you warm. If this surprises you, notice what the forest has already built. Every bird's nest, every squirrel's dray, then share what you see below. The land teaches the same lessons everywhere. Inside, the space is tight, barely large enough to lie down, deliberately so. A larger space would require more body heat to warm. You crawl in through the small entrance, perhaps dragging in armfuls of dry leaves to stuff around your body, and then you pull debris across the entrance hole, sealing yourself in. It is dark. It is close. It smells of earth and decay, that rich scent of autumn compressed into a cave. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to warm. This is not comfortable in the way we have come to expect comfort. There is no light to read by, no space to move. But when the temperature outside is plummeting towards zero, and you are wet and exhausted and out of options, this pile of forest debris becomes salvation. The knowledge keepers who taught this technique spoke of it as temporary medicine, the shelter you build when you are caught out by weather or distance, when night is coming and you will not make it home. The construction requires no tools beyond your hands. The materials are everywhere in a temperate forest. Millions of leaves fall every autumn, creating a deep reservoir of potential insulation. You need only to recognize them not as trash, not as decay, but as the forest's own insulation, the blanket it wraps itself in every winter. And when you understand that, when you see those leaves as technology rather than waste, the forest itself becomes a hardware store. Picture yourself caught between camps in November, the sky darkening at 4 in the afternoon, your clothes damp with sweat from the day's travel. You have matches but no tent, food but no sleeping bag. By the time full darkness comes, you are inside your debris hut, feeling your body heat being held close by 3 feet of leaves, hearing the wind move through the trees above you but not touching you. You will sleep. You will wake in the morning. The knowledge that built this shelter has saved you, as it saved thousands before you, back through the centuries to the first human who understood that warmth is not about generating heat. It is about refusing to let it escape. Reading snow for hidden water, the snow lies unbroken, but beneath it, water still flows. Finding water in winter is not the challenge. Water is everywhere, frozen into every surface. The challenge is finding liquid water, finding the streams and springs that continue to move beneath the ice, the places where you can drink without having to melt snow, a process that costs precious fuel and time and calories. The Dean people of the Northwest Territories developed an intimate literacy of snow patterns, a way of reading the white landscape that allowed them to locate running water even under 3 feet of powder. Look for the subtle depressions in the snow, not the obvious ones, not the tree wells or the tracks, but the faint meandering lines where the surface sits just slightly lower. These depressions mark where warmer air, rising from the flowing water below, has caused the snow to settle and compact differently. Follow these lines and you will find the stream, still moving, still liquid, protected by its own motion and by the insulating snow above. Watch for the vegetation. Willows, alders, and other water-loving plants create darker patches in the winter landscape, their bare branches catching the low sun differently than spruce or pine. Where these grow thick, water is near, not just seasonal runoff, but year-round presence. The plants themselves are a map, written by their own thirst, accurate and honest in a way no paper map can be. Listen, this seems impossible in a landscape muffled by snow, but the elders would tell you to walk quietly, to pause, to pay attention to sounds beneath sounds. Sometimes you can hear the movement of water under the ice, a faint gurgle or rush that reaches your ears not through the air, but through the ground itself, through the soles of your boots. This requires patience. This requires believing that the information is there, waiting for you to quiet down enough to receive it. The knowledge of where water runs in winter was life or death information, memorized and passed down through oral tradition. Certain springs never froze, even in the deepest cold, because they were fed by geothermal heat or deep aquifers. These places had names. They were marked in story, in song, in the collective memory of the people. A young person traveling alone could survive by knowing that 2 days northeast of the Three Sisters Rocks, there was a spring that ran all winter near the lightning-struck pine. This was not GPS. This was territory held in the mind, reliable because it had been tested through generations. Stand now at the edge of a snow-covered meadow in February. You are thirsty. You have no stove to melt snow, or perhaps no fuel. But you remember what you were taught. Look for the depression, find the willows, move slowly and listen. There, a faint line in the snow, curving between 2 hills. You walk to it. You brush away the powder with your mittened hand. And there, just as the old knowledge promised, a thin sheet of ice covers moving water. You break through, you drink. The water tastes of stone and distance, so cold it hurts your teeth. And you give thanks not to some abstract deity, but to the water itself, to the land that provides, to the generations who learned this pattern and carried it forward so that you, right now, might live. The sweat lodge, controlled heat is medicine. Steam rises from a low dome of bent saplings, covered in hides and canvas. The sweat lodge, in Nipai to the Lakota, Madudaswan to the Ojibwe, is often discussed as a spiritual practice, which it certainly is. But it is also a piece of winter survival technology so sophisticated that its benefits are only now being fully understood by Western medicine. In the heart of winter, when the body has been cold for days or weeks, when dampness has settled into your joints and your immune system is struggling, the sweat lodge offers not just warmth, but therapeutic heat, controlled and intentional. The structure is simple, a dome framework of flexible saplings, willow usually, bent and tied to create a low round space. This frame is covered with whatever insulating materials are available. Traditionally buffalo hides or elk hides, later canvas or blankets. The goal being to create a sealed space that will hold heat and steam. The entrance faces a specific direction, often east, and outside, a fire pit heats stones, grandfather stones, as some nations call them, until they glow red in the darkness. These stones are the heart of the technology. Carried on a pitchfork or antler tines into the lodge's central pit, they radiate heat so intense you must sit back from them. Water is poured over them, sometimes just water, sometimes water infused with cedar or sage or sweetgrass, and the steam that rises fills the lodge in seconds, turning the air thick and wet and searingly hot. This is not a casual warmth. This is heat that opens every pore, that makes your heart pound, that forces your body to respond to the sudden shift from winter cold to summer intensity. From a survival standpoint, the sweat lodge does several critical things. It warms the body's core deeply, counteracting the constant heat loss of winter living. It opens the respiratory system, helpful when smoke from cooking fires and the dryness of cold air have irritated your lungs. It promotes circulation, bringing blood to extremities that have been contracting to preserve core heat. And perhaps most importantly, it forces rest. You cannot rush in a sweat lodge, cannot multitask or check your phone, or think about the next urgent task. You sit, you breathe, you sweat, and your body, given permission to stop fighting the cold for even an hour, begins to recover. The ceremony that surrounds the sweat lodge, the prayers, the songs, the rounds of steam and rest, creates a psychological reset as well. Winter depression is real, documented across cultures that face long darkness. The lodge offers community, ritual, heat, and the reminder that spring will come, that this cold is not forever. People emerge red-faced, dripping, exhausted, and somehow renewed. Imagine it is late January. You have been cold for so long, you have forgotten what warm feels like. Your fingers ache at night, your shoulders are perpetually hunched against the wind, and then you are invited into the lodge. You strip down, crawl through the low entrance, sit on the earth inside that dark dome. The stones are brought in, glowing like small suns. The water is poured, and suddenly you are not in winter anymore. You are in some other season, some pocket of summer preserved and gifted to you in the coldest month. You stay as long as you can stand it, until you must crawl out into the snow, your skin steaming in the night air, feeling more alive, more present in your body than you have felt in months. This is ancient climate control. This is using fire and stone and water and plant material to create a microenvironment perfectly suited to human healing. No electricity required, no thermostat, just knowledge, passed down through hundreds of generations about what the body needs and how to provide it, even when the world outside is frozen solid. Pemmican, the perfect calorie. A dense brown cake, hard as wood, lies wrapped in rawhide. Food in winter is not about pleasure, it is about fuel. The human body, fighting cold, burns calories at a staggering rate, up to twice the normal metabolism, every hour, every day, as long as the temperature stays below freezing. The indigenous peoples of the plains and the northern forests understood this. and they developed a food technology so efficient, so nutritionally complete, that it remains unsurpassed even by modern freeze-dried meals. They called it pemmican. The recipe is simple. Dried meat, pounded to a powder. Fat, rendered and purified, usually from bison or caribou. Dried berries, saskatoons, chokecherries, cranberries, crushed and mixed in. The proportions are roughly equal parts meat and fat by weight, with berries added for flavor and vitamin C. These ingredients are mixed together while the fat is still liquid, poured into hide bags and left to cool. The result is a dense, shelf-stable food that will last for decades without refrigeration and provides more calories per ounce than almost any other traditional food. Walk into a winter camp in 1600, somewhere on the northern plains, and you will find pemmican stored in dozens of rawhide bags, stacked like cordwood against the lodge walls. This is the people's insurance policy against starvation, their stored summer, the buffalo's gift extending into the hungry months. A single pound of pemmican provides around 3,000 calories. A person could survive, not comfortably, but survive on 1 pound per day. An 80-pound bag could feed a person through an entire winter. The making of pemmican was communal work, done in the fall when the animals were fat from summer grazing. The meat was cut into thin strips and dried in the sun or over low fires until it was hard and brittle. The fat was carefully rendered, the impurities strained out, until only clean white tallow remained. The berries were dried and pounded. And then, in a gathering that was part work party and part celebration, the ingredients were combined, packed into bags sewn by the hide workers and sealed. This was food, yes, but it was also portable wealth, trade goods, a form of currency that held its value across years. To eat pemmican, you could consume it as is, chewing the dense cake slowly, letting it soften in your mouth, or you could boil it with water and whatever vegetables or grains you had, creating a stew called rubaboo that was the standard meal of fur traders and explorers. The fat coated your throat, provided insulation from within. The meat gave you protein for muscle repair. The berries prevented scurvy. It was, in its way, a perfect food for cold climates. Energy dense, nutritionally balanced, and utterly reliable. Picture yourself on a winter hunt, 3 days from camp, the temperature hovering at 10 below zero. You have been walking since dawn, burning thousands of calories, and your body is screaming for fuel. You reach into your pack and pull out a piece of pemmican the size of your palm. It is hard, almost unappetizing in appearance, more like a brick than food. But you bite into it, and immediately you taste the richness of fat, the earthy tang of dried meat, the slight sweetness of berries. Within minutes, you feel the calories hitting your bloodstream, feel your body warming from within, feel your strength returning. This is food as medicine. This is the knowledge of how to capture summer's abundance and carry it into winter's scarcity. This is survival, compressed into a form you can hold in one hand. Tracking weather by animal behavior. A raven calls 3 times, then falls silent. The Inuit have dozens of words for different types of snow and ice. Because these distinctions matter, they contain information about temperature, wind, age, and safety. Similarly, many indigenous cultures developed a sophisticated understanding of animal behavior as weather prediction, a living forecast more accurate, in many ways, than our modern 5-day predictions. Animals are sensors, their bodies attuned to barometric pressure, humidity shifts, and electromagnetic changes that precede weather fronts. Watching them, listening to them, you could know what was coming hours or days before it arrived. Birds disappear before storms, not metaphorically, literally. Songbirds will feed frantically just before a major weather system moves in, gorging themselves in preparation for hunkering down. Then they vanish, seeking shelter in dense brush or tree cavities, and the forest goes silent. This silence is a signal, clear as a siren. The storm is close. If you are traveling and the birds stop singing, you should stop traveling, make camp, prepare. Mammals shift their behavior in observable ways. Deer and elk will move to lower elevations in sheltered valleys before heavy snow. Squirrels become manic in their caching behavior before hard freezes, working dawn to dusk to move food into their winter stores. Cattle and horses will turn their backs to the direction from which a storm is coming, sometimes hours before human instruments detect anything. The elders would say, "Watch which way the horses are facing in the morning. If they all face the same direction, wind is coming from the opposite way." Even insects carry information. Spider webs covered in dew suggest humid air, likely no precipitation. Dry webs suggest dry air, possible clear weather ahead. Ant activity changes before rain. They seal their mounds, retreating underground. Bees stay close to the hive before weather turns. Flies become more aggressive, seeking warmth in human dwellings when cold fronts approach. This knowledge was not superstition, it was empirical observation, tested and refined across thousands of years. A Cree elder could look at the behavior of jays, the movement of caribou, the shape of clouds, and tell you with remarkable accuracy what weather was coming in the next 24 to 48 hours. This was necessary. Survival often depended on knowing whether to travel or to stay put, whether to hunt or to prepare the camp for a blow. Stand with me on a ridge in October, watching the land below. The aspens are yellow, the air sharp with coming winter, and you notice no bird song. The deer are moving down valley in a steady stream. The ravens are flying low, purposeful, toward the south. Every animal you can see is in motion, repositioning. You have been planning to travel north today, but now you reconsider. You make camp instead. And that night, the first major snowstorm of the season hits, dropping 8 inches and dropping the temperature by 30 degrees. You are safe in your shelter, fire burning, because you listened to what the animals were telling you. Because you remember that you are not separate from this world. You are in it, and everything in it is speaking constantly to those who have learned to hear. Spruce root cordage, the forest's rope. A thin strand, no thicker than shoelace, strong enough to hold your weight. Rope is one of humanity's foundational technologies, but in a winter landscape, commercial rope can freeze, become brittle, or simply be unavailable. The northern forest peoples, particularly the Athabascan and interior Salish nations, developed a technique for harvesting and preparing spruce roots that produced cordage superior in some ways to modern synthetic rope. This knowledge allowed them to construct shelters, lash tools, create snowshoes, set snares, and repair equipment using nothing but what grew beneath their feet. Spruce roots, specifically the lateral roots that grow horizontally just below the surface, are long, flexible, and incredibly strong. To harvest them, you would find a mature spruce, locate a root at the tree's base, and follow it outward, carefully digging with a stick or your hands, pulling it free from the soil. A single root might run 10 or 20 feet, and you would take only what you needed, leaving the tree intact and alive. The raw root is knotted and covered in bark. The first processing step is to coil it and store it for several days to make it pliable. Then you strip the bark, revealing the golden wood beneath, smooth and slightly resinous. This stripping was often done by pulling the root through your teeth, a technique that also allowed you to feel any weak spots or imperfections. The clean root is then split lengthwise, using your thumbnail or a knife, separating it into 2 or even 4 strands. These strands can be used individually or twisted together to create thicker rope. The finished product is remarkable. Spruce root cordage is strong enough for most practical uses, holds knots well, remains flexible in the cold, and has a natural resistance to rot due to the resin content. It was used to lash together the birch bark panels of canoes, to attach stone points to spears, to create the netting for snowshoes, and to bind the poles of lodges and sweat lodges. In a winter emergency, you could use it to repair broken snowshoe webbing, to construct a shelter frame, or to fashion a snare for small game. The knowledge of which trees produce the best roots, how to harvest without killing the tree, how to process and store the material. This was passed down through demonstration, through working side by side with someone who had been taught by someone who had been taught. Back through the generations, it was knowledge held not in books, but in the hands, in muscle memory, in the ability to feel the difference between a root that would split cleanly and one that would break. Imagine you are traveling in deep winter and your snowshoe breaks. A crucial binding snaps under stress. Without snowshoes, you will post hole through deep powder, exhausting yourself in minutes. But you are not helpless. You dig at the base of a nearby spruce until you find a root. You follow it, pull it free, strip it, split it. Within an hour, you have fashioned a replacement binding, lashing the broken snowshoe back together with cordage that will hold for the rest of the winter. The forest provided. The knowledge taught you how to ask. And once again, the old ways prove that they are not obsolete. They are elegant solutions to problems that never went away, just waiting for someone to remember them. Ice fishing with bone hooks and jigging. A line disappears through a dark hole in 3 feet of ice. When rivers and lakes freeze solid, the fish do not disappear. They slow down, moving to deeper water where the temperature is stable, where they can conserve energy through the dark months. For the peoples of the northern lakes, the Ojibwe, the Cree, the northern Algonquian nations, winter fishing was not a sport but a necessity, one of the few sources of fresh protein available when mammals were scarce and hunting conditions were brutal. The technology they developed was precise, effective, and entirely adapted to the materials at hand. The first step is to cut through the ice. Before metal ice augers, this meant using a chisel made from stone, bone, or later trade iron, pounding a hole through sometimes 4 feet of solid ice. This was hard work, rhythmic and exhausting, but necessary. The hole had to be large enough to pull a fish through, but not so large that it would freeze over quickly. The removed ice chunks were piled downwind, creating a windbreak. The hook was made from bone, typically a small mammal bone, sharpened at one end and notched to hold the line, sometimes with a barb carved to prevent the fish from slipping off. No metal, no forging, just careful work with a knife or stone scraper. The line was twisted sinew, braided plant fiber, or spruce root cordage, strong enough to land a pike or walleye. But here is where the technique becomes sophisticated, the jig. Rather than waiting passively for a bite, the fisher would jig the line, lifting and dropping it rhythmically, creating motion that attracted fish. Often a small piece of carved wood or bone was attached above the hook, painted or wrapped with something reflective, creating flash and movement in the dark water. This mimicry of injured prey was irresistible to predatory fish, and the motion kept the line from freezing into the forming ice at the hole's edges. Hours would pass like this, sitting on a hide or spruce boughs beside the hole, jigging steadily, watching the line, feeling for the particular tug that meant a fish was investigating. The cold was constant, bone deep, but the promise of protein, of fat, of food that did not require burning calories to hunt, made it worthwhile. When the tug came, you would set the hook with a sharp jerk, then hand over hand pull the line up, hoping the fish stayed hooked, hoping the line did not break. The fish that came up through the hole, a northern pike with its toothy grin, a fat walleye, a slow-moving whitefish, would freeze within minutes in the above ice air. This was useful. Frozen fish kept perfectly could be stored in a snow cache. Transported without spoilage. The flesh, when cooked, was sweet and firm, and the oil from fish was valuable for everything from lamp fuel to waterproofing. Picture yourself beside a frozen lake in February. The wind scouring the ice, the sun a pale disk, barely clearing the southern horizon. You have been jigging for 2 hours, your arm mechanically rising and falling, and then, the tug. You set the hook, you pull, and up through the dark water comes a fish, silver and spotted, twisting on the line. You pull it onto the ice. It freezes as you watch, its gills stilling, its body going rigid. Tonight you will eat. Your family will eat. And the ice, solid and forbidding to those who do not know it, has once again given up its hidden wealth to those who learn to ask correctly. The thermal efficiency of Earth lodges. A mound of earth, barely visible against the plain, smoke rising from its center. The Plains tribes, the Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, lived in a landscape of extremes, where summer temperatures could reach 100 degrees and winter could plunge to 30 below zero, often within the span of a few months. The teepee, mobile and elegant, served them well during hunting seasons. But for winter, for the months when travel was difficult and survival meant staying in one place, they built earth lodges, semi-subterranean structures that used the earth itself as insulation, creating spaces that remained warm through the coldest nights with minimal fuel. The construction was substantial. First, a circular pit was dug, 3 or 4 feet deep and 30 to 60 feet across. Posts of cottonwood, dozens of them, were sunk around the perimeter and in a pattern across the interior, creating a framework. Rafters were laid from these posts to the central smoke hole, creating a dome shape. Over this framework, layers of willow branches were laid, then prairie grass, then finally a thick layer of sod and earth, sometimes 3 feet deep. The result was a structure that looked from the outside like a hill with a door. Inside, the space was cool in summer and warm in winter, the Earth's thermal mass moderating temperature swings. The floor below the frost line stayed relatively warm year-round. The earth walls absorbed heat from the central fire during the evening, then radiated it slowly back through the night. The smoke hole, plugged with a hide cover when needed, could be adjusted to balance ventilation and heat retention. A single earth lodge could house an extended family, 10, 20, even 30 people, along with their stored food, their tools, their winter gear. The sleeping platforms were built around the perimeter, slightly elevated and draped with hides for privacy. The central area held the fire pit, and above it, racks for drying meat or hanging pots. The space was dark, smoky, crowded, but it was also warm and secure, a permanent shelter that could last for decades with proper maintenance. From an engineering standpoint, the Earth Lodge is brilliant. It uses renewable materials available on site. It requires no metal fasteners, no purchased materials. The thermal mass of the Earth provides free climate control. The semi-subterranean design protects against wind, the single greatest factor in heat loss, and the circular shape distributes structural stress evenly, allowing it to support the massive weight of the Earth covering without interior supports blocking living space. Anthropologists estimate that an Earth Lodge, properly insulated and occupied by a family group, could maintain interior temperatures in the 50s or 60s Fahrenheit, even when outside temperatures drop below zero, using only a modest central fire. Compare this to the fuel consumption of a modern house in the same climate. The amount of energy, the infrastructure required, and the efficiency become stark. Stand outside an Earth Lodge on a January night. The wind is screaming across the plains at 40 miles per hour, and the temperature is 10 below zero. You are wrapped in every layer you own, and still you are cold. You push aside the buffalo hide covering the entrance tunnel and crawl through, and inside it is still. The wind does not exist in here. The cold is held at bay by 20 tons of earth and grass. The fire in the center is small, barely more than coals, but the air is warm enough that people sit comfortably in their shirts, talking, working, children playing. The smoke rises and exits cleanly through the central hole. You can hear the wind outside, but it is distant, abstract. In here, winter has no power. The earth itself has wrapped around you, holding you safe, and you understand why these structures were built, why they were loved, why they represented not just shelter, but a philosophy. Work with the land, not against it, and the land will keep you alive. The snow still falls across the northern forests, the plains, the tundra. It falls now as it fell 1,000 winters ago, indifferent and beautiful and cold. But you are not the same person who began this journey. You have walked through smoke and steam and ice holes. You have held birch bark in your palm and felt its promise of fire. You have seen how a pile of leaves becomes a shelter, how a piece of bone becomes a hook, how the earth itself becomes a warm embrace. These are not relics. These are not museum pieces to be admired behind glass and forgotten. These are living technologies, tested across millennia, refined through trial and survival, and the careful attention of thousands of teachers passing knowledge to thousands of students. They worked then, they work now, and they will work when the power grid fails, when the supply chain breaks, when the easy certainties of modern life reveal themselves to be more fragile than we believed. But more than that, these techniques are a language. They are a way of speaking with winter, of listening to what the land is telling you. of understanding that you are not separate from the cold, but part of it, embedded in it, capable of moving through it with grace if you remember how. The ancestors who developed these methods were not struggling against nature. They were in conversation with it, a conversation that kept them alive and warm and fed for longer than our civilization has existed. If you want to continue this conversation, if you want to learn more of these old arts that still matter, subscribe and walk with us deeper into what the elders knew. Share this with someone who listens to the cold and hears it speaking. Winter is not your enemy, it never was. It is your teacher if you are willing to be taught. And the tuition has already been paid by every person who survived to pass the knowledge forward through the generations to you. The snow falls and now you know how to answer it.